What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to talk about recently UFC 312 was announced to be headlined in Sydney, Australia. A great card. There's always great fights in Australia. Recent fights that have happened there, we got Adesanya versus Strickland, we got Adesanya versus Du Plessis. We got so many good fights that have gone down in Australia, but it has been recently just rumored and headlined, and both of these fighters want to get on this card. Alexander Volkanovski and Israel Adesanya are both targeted to be on this card. And if those two could fight together, that is another massive card. The last two of these individuals fought on the same card, UFC 276, Holloway v. Volkanovski, Adesanya versus Cannonier. Two great friends, two New Zealand and Australian fighters going to headline a fight in Australia. So I kind of want to talk about that, who each one of these individuals were fighting. And lastly, the other fighter who would be on this card would be Jack Della Maddalena in a number one contender bout with a very, very good welterweight who has been rumored, and we can talk about that as well. But if you guys enjoy the UFC content, please have a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there by the comment section and the description, please turn on the post notifications. It's one hit. Tells you guys whenever I release content and MMA news, just to always keep you updated with the recent stuff in the MMA community. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video talking about Jack Della Maddalena, Alexander Volkanovski, and Israel Adesanya all targeting to be on UFC Sydney. Okay, so recently it came out from the UFC. I don't know exactly who broke it, but it was announced that UFC 312 is going to be in Sydney, Australia. And that was something that was kind of rumored before. I know Dricus du Plessis said that he was going to fight as the headliner. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be the headlining fight. But what we do know is Alexander Volkanovski, Israel Adesanya, and Jack Della Maddalena are all aiming to be on that card. And if everyone can get there, that would be an incredible fight card to be had. As we all know, let's start with Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya, last fight was at UFC 305, where he lost the belt to Dricus du Plessis. He is currently one of his last four, with his only win coming at UFC 287 in Miami, Florida, against Alex Ferreira, in one of the craziest knockouts I have ever seen. Now, Israel Adesanya is going to have to fight someone who's below him, and not in a title fight for the first time pretty much ever I've ever seen inside the organization. So I can probably imagine that this is going to be a 5-round co-main event. And who would this fight really be against? Because there's been a couple names thrown out there, but the one person who is being discussed for Israel Adesanya is kind of the person who I believe he should fight, and that is Mr. Caio Borralho, the Mr. Fighting Nerds camp down in Brazil. Teammates with Carlos Prates, Jean Silva, and probably the most terrorizing fight camp right now inside the organization. This would be a banger of a fight. As we all know, Caio Borralho is kind of a jiu-jitsu fighter down there. He's got some good wrestling as well, but he has really developed his striking game. He last fought in mid-August of 2024 versus Jared Cannonier and had an amazing win in that fight. Now, Israel Adesanya, this is a very tough fight for Adesanya, but this is a fight that could be something that is more manageable than someone like a Dricus du Plessis, than someone like a Robert Whittaker, even though he's beat him twice. I do think that Caio Borralho is a good fighter, but I don't know if he's on the level of these other fighters inside the middleweight division. Israel Adesanya needs to get back on the road, and him fighting Caio Borralho at UFC 312 would be a massive fight, a fight that everyone would want to see, and truly is a fight that I know the MMA community would love to accept as a whole. Now, Alexander Volkanovski kind of did a press conference in Sydney, Australia, right after the card was announced, and he said no matter what, he will be there for that night or this card. He says that he wants to fight on this card, no matter what, he wants to fight. So whether he's fighting, or he said whether he's DJ somewhere, he's going to be there for this card, but Alexander Volkanovski's intentions are to be on this card. And who would he fight? Now, the only thing that kind of scares me is that Alexander Volkanovski is looking to fight Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. Now, this fight hasn't even happened yet. This fight is occurring this next weekend on August 26th in Abu Dhabi, UAE. So this would be a very interesting fight to go down. But considering that Ilia Topuria isn't the most active fighter, he last fought Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 298, which was in February of this year. Max Holloway is a little bit more active, and he might be able to turn around that quickly to fight in February of next year, but I'm not exactly sure if that's going to occur. Now, the more likely fight that I could see happening, and the other person actually said that he was more than fair game on doing so, is the new upcoming Mexican-Brazilian star, Diego Lopez versus Alexander Volkanovski for an interim featherweight title. I think that would be an incredible headliner for UFC 312. Even though it isn't, a title fight, this is still an amazing fight to be had. Diego Lopes is on an absolute tear. He's won against Galvin Tucker, Pat Sabatini, Sadiq Youssef, and Brian Ortega now, which are some incredible fights. Oh, I forgot Dan Ige on there at UFC 303 on like 2 hours notice. That's an incredible fighter resume for Diego Lopes. And as we all know, Alexander Volkanovski is probably the greatest featherweight inside the organization, unless if you have Aldo on top or Holloway on top. Either one, it's probably Volkanovski as the number one greatest featherweight. He's fought the likes of Brian Ortega, Max Holloway 3 times. He's won all those fights. He fought the Korean Zombie. He's fought Islam twice, and even though he lost both those fights, the first one was incredibly competitive. Alexander Volkanovski is one of the biggest names in the sport, and him headlining UFC Sydney is only fitting considering that he hasn't been able to fight in Australia since fighting Islam Makhachev at UFC Perth at UFC 294. Now, ultimately, I truly do believe that this is going to be such a fun fight to be had if it is Volkanovski and Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes is one of the fastest starters inside the UFC. He swings for the fences anytime he's in the octagon, but Alexander Volkanovski is one of the smartest fighters, and I do think that this fight between Lopes and Volkanovski is more likely to happen than a possible fight with either Volk or Ilya, or Volk or Max, and that would be the second fight with Ilya or the fourth fight with Max. I just don't think that they're going to want to flip around that quickly. Now, I could see Max Holloway doing it. There's just no chance, in my opinion, that Ilya Taporia is going to do it, and I think Ilya is going to want to fight in Spain, considering that they're kind of hinting at that for May or April of next year. But the last fighter is Jack Della Maddalena, and Jack Della Maddalena broke his arm or hand in his bout with Gilbert Burns at UFC 299 in Miami, and he wasn't able to fight on the UFC 305 card, which he was really targeting to fight on. He wanted to get a number one contenders match there, possibly with Shavkat Rakhmonov, who's not fighting with the title, but Jack Della Maddalena is actually aiming to return on this card, and the fight matchup is none other than Mr. Kamaru, the Nigerian Nightmare Usman, and this would be an incredible fight to see Jack Della and Kamaru Usman go, and I would really love to see this fight as a 5-round war between these two individuals, but I don't know if they're going to exactly do that. Jack Della Maddalena is a great prospect coming up from Australia. He beat Gilbert Burns. He was losing that fight to Burns, but in that third round, he bit down on his mouthpiece, and he hit Gilbert Burns with a perfectly timed knee as he was shooting in for the takedown to ultimately get the ground and pound finish. As we all know, Kamaru Usman is on a 3-fight losing streak, but considering his opponents, that's not that bad. He lost at UFC 278 to Leon Edwards by head kick with a minute left in the fight after he was winning that fight completely. He then lost the rematch to Leon, or the third fight to Leon at UFC 286, and he fought Hamza Chimaev at 10 days notice at UFC 294, which I can't even blame him for losing because that is such a hard opponent to fight on such short notice. But I do think that Jack Della Maddalena versus Kamaru Usman would be such an incredible fight to be had, considering that we got the new age in Jack Della Maddalena going up against one of the best, greatest welterweights of all time, in my opinion, the second greatest welterweight right behind Georges St. Pierre. I do think that this fight would possibly be for another number one contender shot after Shavkat Rakhmonov and Bilal Muhammad fight in December, and I truly do think that this would be a very incredible fight to put on. We got a kind of wrestling heavy style for Kamaru Usman. Jack Della Maddalena is one of the best boxers inside the organization. This would be a very good test for both opponents, and it's a fight that I truly do think should be put on at UFC 312. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think about UFC 312 as a whole, and possibly getting to see Israel Adesanya, Alexander Volkanovski, and Jack Della Maddalena on the same card. This would be a massive card for Australian fans, considering that Jack Della and Volkanovski are both from Australia, and Israel Adesanya is a New Zealand fighter, but this would be an incredible card to be had. The headliner for this card would most likely be Diego Lopes versus Alexander Volkanovski for an interim featherweight title. Co-main event, 5 rounds, Kyle Brahalo versus Israel Adesanya in a very, very impactful middleweight bout. And the featured bout on this card, in my opinion, I would love for it to be a 5-round war with Kamaru Usman and Jack Della Maddalena, the new versus the old, kind of the passing of the torch possibly, in a very hard test for Jack Della Maddalena. Ultimately, this card has the opportunity to be one of the best cards of 2025, considering that these 3 fighters at the top would make this card absolutely insane, considering that Volk is such an amazing fighter, Adesanya's up there too, and Jack Della Maddalena is one of the best prospects coming up. I could 100% see UFC 312 be probably card of the year at this point if this is what the lineup's going to look like. And especially if you get some other fighters in there like Dan Hooker, get some other Australian fighters, this card could 100% be card of the year. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always notified about further UFC content releasing every single day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.